Bonjour and welcome! Today I'll be reviewing Elise Cappelle's new book, Collapse Feminism. If you don't know who Elise Cappelle is, she is a left-wing YouTuber focusing primarily on feminist theory and critique of neoliberal capitalism. Before we proceed to the actual review, we need to take a quick look at what Cappelle herself says she wants to achieve with the book, so we know on what basis we are reviewing it. In a post on YouTube put out about 2 months ago, as I was writing the script, Cappelle writes that she wanted to write something that was both educational and engaging, so that everyone can learn something from it, even if they don't agree with her on everything. She writes that she wanted to combine academic rigor with entertainment, to make reading the book a fun learning experience. The contents of the book itself concerns primarily the internet landscape and how it has affected the feminist movement, particularly the new challenges feminism is faced with in a digital age. In short, Collapse Feminism is intended as an educational but accessible and fun book that seems to have been written for an as wide an audience as possible. As such, it doesn't appear that any foreknowledge about the topics or themes is required, nor are the readers expected to have any knowledge about the books that Cappelle addresses in her book. Now, the book itself is structured into 2 parts, each consisting of 2 main chapters with several subsections. The first part is called The Ideal Woman, and it concerns the various challenges that feminism is faced with due to social media. The first chapter is about how neoliberal capitalism has incorporated certain aspects of feminism into itself and produced particular aesthetics, such as the girl boss or the so-called it girl. Cappelle criticizes these movements for using the facade of political consciousness to divert criticism from the inherently exploitative capitalist structures they partake in. She even uses a specific term to describe this practice, that being pastel progressivism, a kind of progressivism that produces the aesthetic of progress without actual change. I can honestly say that this section of the book was my absolute favourite. It really was incredibly good. But to get on with the review, let's turn to the second chapter of the first section of the book. Here, Cappelle addresses what we might call the flip side of pastel progressivism, namely the resurgence of the idealized, traditional lifestyle. Whereas pastel progressivism is based around girl power and female entrepreneurship, so-called tradwives are presenting a lifestyle of comfort and passivity, living in complete subservience to their husbands. To her credit, Cappelle recognizes the importance of allowing women to have agency, but at the same time, she sees that willingly submitting to a man may not be in the best interests of any woman. However, rather than overtly condemning those who make the choice to be a traditional wife, Cappelle demonstrates an ability to adopt a nuanced position, as she advises that we enter into compassionate dialogue with these women and try to guide them towards reaching different opinions that will grant them greater agency in their lives. Now, in the second part of the book, titled A Failed Sexual Revolution, Cappelle defends various aspects of the sexual revolution from a few different angles. The first chapter in the second section, The Will Not to Change, deals with forces opposed to sexual liberation, among them the manosphere, toxic masculinity, and importantly, incels, that is, involuntarily celibate. I really appreciate how Cappelle is willing to recognize these incels as being vulnerable people who are, as she says, the victims of the politics of desirability, and that the hatred some of them have for women are extensions of self-hatred. As she notes, many incels traverse the internet hoping to find advice on how to improve themselves. They then get sucked into the manosphere, which promises to help them, but more often than not, teaches them mostly to behave like toxic men. Personally, I do think it is important to recognize the complexity of the incel situation, to neither demonize them nor see them as nothing more than lonely single men, and I really appreciate that Cappelle is offering that complexity. Now, before I move on to the criticism part of the video, I just want to say that I found the book very enjoyable and easy to read. So at least in this regard, I think Cappelle achieved her goal. With the regards to her book being educational and upholding academic rigor, I have a few reservations. A few times when I was reading the book, I got this feeling that something was amiss. The first issue I want to address is how Cappelle deals with Richard Reeves' book of Boys and Men. She complains that Reeves' book, quote, aligns with conservative strategy to pathologize social evolutions that benefit women into a masculinity crisis, and asserts that, as a researcher, Reeves could have analyzed the disparities he recorded through different frameworks. Note here that Cappelle doesn't give any examples of what different frameworks could incorporate Reeves' findings. She is content to assert that they exist, and the reader is supposed to take her at her word for it. Nor has she provided anything other than the fact that Reeves is addressing issues concerning men to substantiate her claim that his work aligns with conservative strategies. Cappelle then goes on to write that, quote, at a time when the manosphere is growing, when feminism is being attacked from every corner, Reeves' choice to make male gender inequality something one can think and theorize is concerning, as it gives people yet another reason to blame it all on women. End quote. To me, this does not sound like someone assessing an argument they disagree with in a scholarly and rigorous manner. This sounds like a reactionary political pundit, using inflammatory us versus them rhetoric to dismiss an issue that does not align with their worldview. It almost sounds as if Cappelle thinks that acknowledging issues that men face inherently detracts from the feminist struggle and reinforces right-wing anti-feminism. Maybe this isn't what she means to say, and I don't think it is. But then I think she should have spent more time clarifying what it was she was actually arguing. To be clear, I'm not necessarily defending Reeves. I haven't read his book, and so I have no way of taking a position in relation to it. Rather, I'm criticizing Cappelle for the way she dismisses Reeves seemingly on the basis that he isn't on her team, rather than engaging with his actual arguments. This wouldn't necessarily be a problem if the book was written as a political commentary, but Cappelle stated that she wanted to maintain academic rigor, which includes engaging with arguments in good faith, not just source referencing them. And maybe this wouldn't bother me that much if it was a one-off, but sadly it's not. In the final section of the book before the conclusion, Cappelle brings up a book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry. Once again, I don't think Cappelle properly engages with the contents of the book, nor with Perry's general arguments. She is content to call Perry's opinions dangerously regressive, and claim that Perry blends supposedly right-wing and supposedly left-wing positions in a way that we, quote, need to be careful about, end quote. The one time Cappelle does engage with Perry's argument, she quotes her to have said that stay-at-home mothers don't have the same social support they used to have. Cappelle responds by talking about welfare and economics. However, it isn't obvious based on the quote Cappelle provided that that is what Perry is talking about. She could have been talking about social support in terms of community rather than economics. If Perry is talking about economics, then Cappelle has failed to establish that before she criticizes her. If Perry isn't talking about economics, then Cappelle has misrepresented her. Either way, Cappelle is basically failing to make her argument, by failing to convincingly set up the argument she's arguing against. In addition, towards the end of the section about Perry, Cappelle claims that Perry takes inspiration from the Bible. Her evidence? The fact that the Gospel Coalition compared Perry's chapter titles to titles a lecture series on Genesis might have. In other words, Cappelle's evidence has nothing to do with anything Perry herself has said or written, but is based on what other people have said about Perry in a review. I find this way of conducting an argument completely unacceptable. What if I were to make assertions about Cappelle's motivations based on a review that I've read, without actually making any reference to Cappelle herself? I mean, I'm sure she would not be okay with that, and I don't understand why she's okay doing so herself. And what is worse is that Cappelle writes that, quote-unquote, Perry has been successful at cultivating her ambiguity, citing Perry's work as a feminist journalist, and continues by writing that, quote, every time she speaks publicly, she remains tolerant enough to keep her feminist label, but also cultivates among her readers a strong anti-liberal elite pro-family sentiment. Then she goes on to say that Perry, quote, knows how to differentiate herself from hardcore conservatives. For instance, she supports several pro-family welfare measures, including the improvement of maternity leave, end quote. In saying these things, Cappelle seems to be assuming that Perry is acting in bad faith, that her support of welfare is disingenuous, and part of an attempt to infiltrate feminism with conservatism. Cappelle certainly has not put forth enough evidence to justify her claims about Perry's intentions and motivations. Yet Perry got off easy compared with someone like Ben Shapiro, whom Cappelle claims has probably never sexually satisfied a woman. Now, I have no love for conservative pundits like Ben Shapiro, but attacking him based on presumed lack of sexual prowess is, in my opinion, not okay under any circumstances. In fact, the entire chapter called "Conservatives Are Bad at Sex," found in the final section of the book, seems to me to be little more than personal attacks against people Cappelle doesn't like. I mean, don't get me wrong, many of them I don't like either, but that doesn't mean I think it's okay to make personal attacks against them based on sex, particularly when someone like Ben Shapiro has never laid claim to be sexually lustrous. And there were other times when I was genuinely wondering what Cappelle was even arguing. Take for example the top section of page 58, where she talks about women's capacity for choice, choose to work or choose to stay at home. She makes it clear that choice is important, but that not all women have the ability to choose. Yet from this she draws the conclusion that choice should not be an end in itself. I don't understand how this conclusion follows from the premises she sets up. If choice is important, but not everyone has access to choice, then the conclusion would seem to be that we should seek to grant as many people as possible the choice they don't currently have. As such, there seems to be a mismatch between the conclusion drawn from the premises and the conclusion that Cappelle arrives at. But the section that left me the most confused was the conclusion of the book, broken down into 4 chapters. The first one I read several times because I did not understand it. It seems that Cappelle's solution to the alienation of labour under capitalism is that we should work less. Maybe I completely misunderstood it, but I don't know what else she could have been arguing. And to me, that seems like a very elitist position, because it presumes that the people who are alienated can afford to work less, that work is not an absolute necessity. Which it absolutely is for most people. That's why capitalism works. The next section after that argues that we should prioritize friendship over family. I get that Cappelle is of the opinion that the family is an oppressive patriarchal institution. But, for example, what is someone to do if they want a child? Are they not supposed to prioritize that child over their friends? Again, I was kind of confused. Then she wanted to deprivatize the internet, but says nothing about how this is to be done. Again, I'm confused. Lastly, she argues for the importance of long-term goals, but also of short-term, achievable goals. Yet it is the latter that I find absent in the conclusion of her book. These proposed solutions ignores the material limitations of capitalism, the practical applications of the family structure, and how to execute political goals. Honestly, and I'm sorry to say this, but to me, Cappelle's solutions sound more like wishful thinking than anything else. I get the value of ideals, but the short time she spends explaining why and how they would be beneficial, and how they may come about, is, to me, very disappointing. So to conclude, I think the first section of the book is definitely the strongest, where she talks mostly about neoliberal online identities. It is when Cappelle becomes overtly political, but rushes past arguments without engaging with them properly, that the book really falls short. It was important to me to highlight that Cappelle was nuanced with regards to incels and women's choice, because it demonstrates that she can be nuanced, making her lack of nuance when discussing Reeves and Perry very disappointing. If Cappelle isn't going to contend with the contents of their arguments, she shouldn't have brought them up in the first place. Ultimately, I think the book suffers from Cappelle trying to do too much. In a Zero Books interview, she talks about how her original vision was about studying the formation of online identities. The more overtly political aspects of the book came afterwards, and unfortunately, it shows. Had she stuck with her original vision for the book, I think it would have been great. But by trying to do too much, by not giving particular issues the time and care they deserve, she ends up undermining her own credibility. Because of the issues I have discussed, though it was a very enjoyable read, I can't rate this book any higher than a 6 out of 10. I'm sorry. But honestly, maybe this isn't necessarily so bad. This is Cappelle's first book after all, so it's only natural that there is a learning curve when going from the medium of video essay to a book. Indeed, Cappelle has stated that the book is basically a very long video essay, but whereas you can afford to be brazen in a video essay, a book demands more dedication from its audience and therefore more care from its writer. That being said, Cappelle's writing skills are impressive, and I'm sure she'll go on to write many books, improving and learning as she goes, and I look forward to reviewing them. On that note, I hope you enjoyed the review. Please tell me what you thought about Cappelle's book. Is there anything I misunderstood or need to address? Please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.